Good afternoon, and welcome to Inside the Booth Leadership Circle. My name is Lauren Patnaude, and I am a proud Dean Society donor and the gift chair of the Class of 2011 Reunion Committee. We are glad to have you with us today on this exclusive call with Dean Madhav Rajan. I want to personally thank our Dean Society members and reunion volunteers who are in attendance. On behalf of the school, thank you for all you do for Chicago Booth. Each of you represent key leaders in the school's ongoing success with your investments of time and resources. These are critical to advancing the work of the school. We appreciate you joining us here today. Our presentation will last for 45 minutes. Dean Rajan and I will spend about 20 to 30 minutes in conversation, really focused on how the events of this past year have shaped the school's strategy as we move forward into a post-pandemic world, and how our network of alumni donors and leaders continue to play a key role in Booth's ongoing success. Questions and comments are welcome during the conversation. If you'd like to submit a question during this time, please use the Q&A box below. We had some questions submitted during registration, and I invite you to send others that come up today during today's session. We will reserve about 10 minutes at the end of the call for Q&A. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Dean Madhav Rajan, the George Pratt Schultz Professor of Accounting and Dean at Chicago Booth since July of 2017. Dean Rajan, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Lauren.
Dean, it has been a year of really extraordinary change and adaptation for all of us personally. So maybe let's just start with how you have been.
It's been an interesting year for sure. I think that anyone who thinks academia is boring or dull or just follows the same usual cycles, I think this year completely dispelled all of those myths. It's been a crazy year, very stressful at times. I think we have come out of it pretty well, but I would say that it's been a year certainly where I learned a lot about myself, about the school, about the team, and also about how to make things different going forward. So I would say it's ultimately been a year of huge learning, and which I think will be really good for us going forward.
Well, that leads really well into then the opening question of, look, not only have the personal lives of the Booth community been impacted by COVID, right, but the work of the school had to transform. I mean, you had to lead the school in a transition first to remote learning and then to hybrid learning. And you really worked hard to keep the culture and community intact across a more distributed faculty and student body. What are those key lessons learned from the pandemic, and how does the experience of the pandemic help inform the future strategy of the school?
Yeah, so I think when you go back to last March, which is when it all began in March 2020, we had literally no time to have a plan, right? This is by definition a once in 100-year phenomenon. So it's not like we had a backup plan that we could sort of pull out, from the back pocket. It happened and we had to react immediately. I would say the first really big shift was that in a space of 2 weeks, we had to move every one of our classes to remote teaching. This is something we have never done. And one of the reputations of the University of Chicago is that the faculty sort of run the place and are sort of reluctant to make change happen certainly quickly. I can say that that is not the case. I'm very proud that we did not cancel a single course last spring, right? Everybody within, like a week or two, we extended spring break by a week to get some more time. They adjusted their classes, they taught remotely. Was it great? Teaching is no, because everybody was going down the learning curve, but the learning was actually quite good. We would survey the students and they said they were, very happy with the faculty's ability to engage them even on a remote basis. Very Chicago story is that many of our peer schools went to sort of no grading or pass-fail grading. Our faculty refused to do that. So they still, they taught the class, they had, class participation, they did grading, they graded them on the curve. And I think that ultimately contributed very much to the teaching experience being good. But then, this was a year ago, right? So we then learned through summer and then fall. In the fall, we introduced hybrid teaching, which is, you have some people in the class, some people remotely. Honestly, that did not go well, right? Again, there were just a lot of technical and other challenges to overcome. But I'm very pleased to say, like right now, we're doing hybrid teaching again in the spring. And I just looked at the student survey, and the people who responded were very happy with the hybrid model, right? They felt like we had learned a lot, the technology was working fine, and they actually loved the experience. So the big changes have been our faculty first learning how to teach remotely and in the hybrid model, and knowing how they can keep being the best faculty while doing that. That's been fantastic. Second is that learning that a lot of things that we do, we can do remotely. Through this, right, our staff have all been working from home, but they've been able to continue to do that at a very, very high level, whether it's career services or admissions or sort of managing, student life, all of that has worked well. So that's again been a big change. And we have realized that going forward, finding a way to give people more flexibility in their jobs is a key, right? I think, even as we want to go back to normal, I don't think there is normal as in the old normal. And so one of the things that we're now thinking about is how do we transition to a world where people have more flexibility in terms of doing their jobs? So I think we're doing that. I would say the third thing that's been a big success, frankly, and looking back, you go, well, duh, you should have done this earlier, right? Is I think we're able to connect with alumni much better now through these sorts of remote modalities, right? Like doing Zoom meetings. We're getting huge audiences for these events, right? We had many, many thousands for Economic Outlook, for example. And we're able to do targeted events for, Asia Pacific, for EMEA at different times and get much higher sort of audience participation. So I think we've been able to keep actually in better touch with our alumni than we did before. We're also able to engage alumni much better. We've started doing events where I will interview a faculty member and then, invite some alumni to come in. One thing I think that really distinguishes Chicago is that, students tend to get very closely connected to the faculty and the academic work of the school to a much greater extent than any other place I know. And this is a nice way to sort of bring that back, where the audience feels they can actually ask questions, make it sort of interactive. So we have learned that actually works better than the old model. And so I think, again, Lauren, that's something we'll try to continue to do as we move into the sort of new world.
That's great. And always good to hear that the grading bar remains in place. So you just talked about a few things that the school obviously has done well in pivoting. Where would you say the school still has opportunity to do better?
I think one thing we've not figured out how to do is to give students the sort of social aspects of the MBA while this is going on. And I think if you would ask our students, they would say that that's the thing that's really lacking, right? Sort of their network, their community. And, we've tried to do like additional events. At some point, though, to be honest, I think they've hit Zoom fatigue. And we have seen that, the bar for the set of events that will attract our students, the bar keeps getting higher and higher. So, and so I think we're all at a point where we've realized that, yeah, there's a limit to how many remote events we can do to keep the students sort of engaged. And I think finding ways to keep their community strong and active and socially connected in this time is something we just honestly haven't still worked out. The second thing I'll say is that our faculty have become sort of very comfortable with this model where they're doing sort of the teaching hybrid or remote. But we need to transition. I think one thing that makes us a great school is that this is a place where faculty are always present and active and engaged. And to keep the academic life of the school going from the faculty side, Lauren, I think the faculty need to be back and interacting. Mm-hmm. And we try to do Zoom faculty seminars and all of that stuff. That's just not a substitute for the real thing, we've realized. So we need to get the faculty back and interacting and sort of yelling at each other in seminars as quickly as possible. That's what makes our faculty great, is the constant debate and engagement, and I think that, again, we never figured out a way to do that during the pandemic.
Yes, getting back together to yell at one another will be one of my key takeaways from this. So obviously the pandemic has not been the only major event of the past year at the university or in the broader world, right? Issues around racial injustice, social unrest, and the rise in geopolitical tensions are all really important contexts in which the school operates. It'd be helpful if you could spend some time going deeper on booth strategy around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and touch on the specific investments that are being made to support those priorities.
Yeah, so this came up, I think, this was a big event across the country, right? And across the world, if you think about the impact that the events of last late spring had. And I think it sort of brought into stark focus the country's issues with sort of, past racial discrimination and things that are happening today. And as well as issues like economic inequality, right? That's persisted sort of across generations. So we've always taken very seriously at Booth the notion of diversity and inclusion, which is that this is a place where we want to get the best people, regardless of who they are. We give them a forum to say, discuss their ideas, right? Chicago has always been known as the place where nothing is off topic, nothing is off limits. You can say what you want, but always engaging in a very constructive dialogue and discussion. And that, I think, has continued. So with the help of our students, the African American MBA Student Association, we put together a specific sort of D&I plan last year. We have a Dean's Diversity Advisory Committee that meets with, Star Marcello, who runs our MBA program routinely. We're sort of reaffirmed our commitment to it. And this covers a whole broad range of issues, right? Student admissions, curriculum, sort of faculty and staff, communications, employer relations, sort of engagement with the community. And so we have a very, very comprehensive plan, which is actually on our website on all the different things we're trying to do. We also set up a faculty diversity and inclusion committee to think about, sort of faculty recruiting and how can we do a better job on that front. We've done quite well this year in bringing in, certainly on the adjunct faculty, many more faculty of color to teach at Booth. And that's going, I think, quite well. We are actually the leader as a school in thinking about how to increase the pipeline of faculty of underrepresented minorities who want to get into PhD programs, right? Ultimately, that's whom we hire as faculty. So Pietro Veronesi, who's the deputy dean, started this whole consortium where the goal is to try to get underrepresented minorities to think about doing a PhD and to essentially fund them into becoming research assistants after their undergraduate work so that they will then take up PhD careers. So this is actually taken on sort of a life of its own. And Pietro has done a fantastic job moving the needle forward. So we're very, very excited about that and sort of what's going to come out of that. I think if you look ahead sort of the next 5 to 10 years, that program, Lauren, has the capacity to make sort of a massive difference. And we're also engaged with the alumni on this topic, right? We have our Office of Advancement launched a series of dialogues on diversity and inclusion to discuss sort of diversity in work and life. And I think this has drawn more than 1,200 attendees to date, sort of to the various events that they do. MBA Student Life, we did a whole bunch of student events. We had a Black History Month event with Trevor Noah. We had a Women's Month event with Laverne Cox. Like I said, the bar is just very, very high for stuff that we do. We had an anti-Asian hate discussion with Simi Liu. So we've taken very, very concrete steps to engage with the students in the community. And Jane Rajan on our behavioral science faculty is teaching a new class on diversity in organizations, which takes sort of insights from behavioral science to think about how do you promote organizational health related to DE&I. And in Reconnect, we have specific events for our alumni, for our Latinx alumni and Black alumni to connect this week. And so this is something that we take very, very seriously. Obviously there's a lot of work that we have to continue to do, but I think we've made pretty good steps this year.
That's great. And you mentioned sort of in all those different stakeholders, you mentioned alumni, which who are obviously all on this call today. Can you just talk a little bit about the role of alumni, not just in terms of financial investments, but some of the leadership that you've seen across the alumni community?
Absolutely. So when these events were happening, our alumni reached out to us. And again, the great thing about Chicago is that the alumni are always trying to figure out how can I, the engagement is always constructive. The engagement is always, okay, how can I help you, right? Yeah. And again, it's not just financial, right? It's bringing that expertise to bear. It's coming to talk to our students. It's mentoring our students, right? It's helping them find careers that they want to do. So our alumni have been amazing. So we actually have a Chicago Booth Diversity and Inclusion Alumni Task Force. And that launched this year. So we have 31 alumni leaders, and there are sort of three distinct communities committees that they're serving on, helping with admissions, with alumni engagement, and with fundraising. And this was all shaped by the alumni leaders, and they're leading the way. And we have leaders from the Chicago Booth Women's Network and the Chicago Booth Black Alumni Association who are driving connection among the alumni. And many others have raised their hands to sort of help us as we go through. And just last week, we had more than 80 donors, largely alumni, but also faculty and staff who supported the Chicago Booth Diversity and Inclusion Fund Challenge that we had put in. So I think we're seeing great interest from our alumni in participating in it, great interest in making sure that, because they love the school, they want to make sure we're doing the right thing and that we are progressing in sort of the right way. So I think it's been fantastic, the engagement from the alumni.
That's great. I really appreciate all those perspectives. And these are obviously incredibly important and very dynamic issues, and look forward to seeing really meaningful progress against all those priorities, recognizing, to your point, that certainly pipeline work, you start to make investments today, and they do take some time to really show returns. One of the other important contextual elements for Booth is that in the midst of the pandemic and other economic, social, political issues, there's also a significant transition underway with the new president of the university. And before we get into what that transition means for Booth, can you just provide some brief background on the new president?
Sure. So the new president's name is Paul Alivisato. So I actually met him a couple of weeks ago in person. He lives in Berkeley, and so I was in California, and so I went to his house to meet him there. So Paul's background is he's a chemist, and he's a phenomenal chemist. I think he's won the Wolf Prize, which is sort of the highest prize in chemistry. He's viewed as being on the short list to get a Nobel Prize in chemistry. So we may have acquired that in addition to just acquiring him as a president. But I think the things about Paul's background that are most relevant, Lauren, is that he used to run the Lawrence Livermore Labs, right? Sort of, which is connected to Berkeley. And obviously, University of Chicago is pretty unique in that we have two national labs, Argonne and Fermi, that are connected to us. So the fact that Paul has that background coming in, I think is quite significant, because Argonne and Fermi are a significant part of the University of Chicago. Paul is also currently the provost at Berkeley. So he's sort of been managing sort of financial and academic issues at a leading institution, and brings that to the table. He's a Chicago undergrad. So he did this undergrad he's born in Chicago, raised in Chicago, did his undergrad here. And so he took the Common Core back in the day. So he has that sort of experience that has shaped him as well. So it's in many ways a great combination. Somebody who knows Chicago, knows the university, and has sort of gone out and had experience. The other interesting aspect of his that's relevant, I would say, is that he's an entrepreneur. So he's worked on a couple of startups that were spun out from some of the research that he did. And so I think he brings a lot. In many ways, his choice, I think, is a real signal by the Board of Trustees, who ultimately are the choosers, that they feel the move into applied science is critical for U Chicago. And if you go back a few years, with the Pritzker School of Molecular Engineering, right, that was a big investment the university made for the first time. I think this is sort of a continuation of that trend, if you will.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And recognizing, right, it's still very early in his tenure. It would also be helpful to understand, what his initial perspectives or priorities are for the university, and really what that means to Booth in particular.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So he's starting September. So I should not say that he's had, he's not even started yet. So he's beginning in September.
Very early in his tenure.
I think so he has huge regard for Booth. So let me start with that, right? I think he views us as, sort of a crown jewel for the university, that we're operating at an incredibly high level. He's very, very appreciative of where we are. He's also very appreciative of the investments we have made in the past 3 years in connecting with the university. And that takes multiple forms, right? One is at the graduate level. We have the joint masters with computer science that's doing really well. We launched this accelerated JD MBA just this past year, which is doing phenomenally well. And he really appreciates the fact that we've been trying to do connections at the graduate level, but even more than that with undergrad. So the business economics major we launched 3 years ago, that has taken off like a rocket, right? I mean, that is growing at a phenomenal pace. So Jim Nondorf, who runs admissions, told me that it's already in just its third year, the third largest major at the university on a standalone basis. So, and again, that because Paul comes from Berkeley, where they do have the Haas School, which offers an undergrad degree, he sees the value of having made that investment. So he's very appreciative of that. I would say what he's looking to Booth for is that he will leave us alone, one, but expect us to step up and help the university in terms of the whole applied science commercialization aspect. So in many ways, the stuff that we've been doing with the Polsky Center is very critical to him. He views that as critical, particularly given his entrepreneurial background, to saying, okay, how can we help faculty from the biological sciences or the physical sciences or Pritzker School of Molecular Engineering to commercialize their ideas? So the way I think about it is that we are the content provider on this front. We've been doing it a long time. I mean, NVC has been around, like this is its 25th anniversary this year, right? NVC has been around forever. We know how to do this. And essentially to take what we do and then bring it to the university, I think that's the role he would like us to play, which I'm thrilled to do. And so just 10 days ago, we announced this, the new quantum accelerator that's going to be actually housed at Booth, right? This is an exciting area for us to get into, which is deep tech commercialization. And so as the government, US government invests in quantum science, the US government has announced 7 quantum science research institutes across the country. 3 of them are in Illinois, right? 1 at Urbana, 1 at Argonne, 1 at Fermi. And so we launched this new quantum accelerator that's going to be at Booth. So I think that's the kind of stuff he wants us to do sort of more and more of, which I think is super exciting for us and for our alumni.
Yeah, that is great, and really an amazing vision for someone who's not yet stepped foot into the role. So we look forward to seeing more from him and understanding how it intersects with Booth. So, we spent sort of the first portion of this going deep into a few specific areas. So maybe now we can widen the aperture a bit and understand how this all ties together, really into the more comprehensive strategy for Booth going forward. So, what are the top priorities for the school in 2021 and beyond? And really, since we're all fairly competitive, what do you think sets us apart from our peers in thinking about these topics?
Sure. So maybe to do that, it's probably best if I work backwards, right? And talk about what is it when I came to this role, I thought were things that had to sort of get done, and where are we on that, and where do I think we sort of need to go? So when I took the role, one of the main things I wanted to do was the recognition that we aspire to be the best academic school of business in the world, right? And that starts with the faculty and making sure that we have the best faculty, we're able to recruit and retain them. And that had become an issue, right? And so sort of making sure that when we get the great faculty that we keep them is critical. So more than any other institution, Lauren, our senior faculty are people who began as rookies at Booth. So our model really isn't about sort of going out and constantly hiring people. We want to, you look at, Gene Farmer, Steve Kaplan, Luigi, Raghu, right? All of these people started as rookies here. And that's our model, is to get the best people early and then get them sort of into the Chicago culture and make them sort of stay. And we had been losing a lot of people at the mid-level who would get tenure here, but then get sort of bid away, right? So part of my, when I came was, okay, we got to stop that. And we've done a fantastic job, honestly, on that front. The number of tenure line faculty has gone up from 135 when I started to, it's 155 now. It's the highest it's ever been. And what makes that really interesting is that, to be honest, we actually have a lot of faculty turnover because we don't, getting tenure at Booth is not easy. So I actually calculated this. The unconditional probability that when you hire somebody as a rookie, that they eventually get tenure at Chicago Booth is only 27%.
Wow.
Right? And so we have a lot of people who sort of leave either at the associate level or at the tenure level. And so net of that, we've managed to grow, right? So which has been quite good. So we've become much better at recruiting the best faculty and much better at retaining the top faculty. And so that's been a huge positive. I think that my notion for what the steady state tenure line strength is around 160. So we're kind of getting there.
Mhm.
And I think most groups, if you ask them, would say that they're at sort of at the right size now, right? So that's I think has worked really well, is one. Second thing is sort of completing the international expansion of the school, or sort of solidifying it, if you will. And so when I came, we were just doing the fundraising for the Hong Kong campus. And so obviously we finished that, we opened the building, and that's gone well. Last year, we moved to a new building in London, right? Because the London campus, we were renting a place which was frankly not that great. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It was sort of a one floor in a multi-story building, and you couldn't even put signage outside. Nobody knew this had anything to do with Chicago. So we made a big push a year and a half ago. We have found a new place in London, a block from St. Paul's Cathedral. So fantastic location. We have the first 3 floors of a 9-story new building, and we have our own entrance. We have a Chicago booth signage. So that's the good news. The bad news is the grand opening was scheduled to be April 2020. So it did not happen.
Impeccable timing.
So we still haven't done the formal opening yet. So that's one of the things that is sort of upcoming, is once England they seem to be doing quite well, as you know, once they get through their sort of COVID restrictions, to do the grand opening for that campus. I have high hopes for that campus. Again, the goal was really not to focus on London, but it's to view London as a base for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And to sort of get more students. So in particular, we have, I think like 15% of our students in London now come from Africa.
Wow.
So we want to sort of push that. Again, so Middle East and Africa are frankly, regions we really want to have a great presence in, and use that as the basis for drawing people to London. So getting that campus launched formally, it's a great campus because it's much bigger than what we currently have. We can do executive programs there. And actually, if any of you alumni, if you do events in London, it's actually an event space. Our goal was to turn it into a Gleacher, right? So you can actually rent it out for events, do conferences there. So if that's of interest to any of you in London, feel free to do that. So getting London going, I think, is going to be a big one sort of going forward. The third thing that when I started was to connect better to the campus. And that's gone, frankly, much better than I had expected with this new joint programs and the business economics programs I talked about. On that front, couple of things we launched last year, which we have to see how they play out. One is that we launched these new accelerated pathways for undergrads from UChicago to get into Booth. So this year, we're piloting a program where a senior at UChicago sort of comes straight into Booth. And we call it the Maroon Scholars Program. It was a pilot, and we have 35 students doing it. And the point was you could start at Booth for a year, and then you go get your work experience. And then you finish your MBA sort of later. So we'll have to see how that plays out, right? Many of our alumni might recognize that back in the 1970s and 80s, we used to have a program like this called the Professional Option Program. And that was sort of disbanded, but this is sort of in many ways a way to kind of go back to that. And we're also trying to do, because we now have the business economics major, we're telling undergrads at UChicago, look, if you take, these are classes taught by Booth faculty, right? So there's actually a funny story about that, which I'll tell you in a minute. So if you take these classes while you're an undergrad and then come back to Booth, we'll give you course credit for what you've already covered. So that's potentially going to make it possible to do an accelerated program. So we'll have to see how those play out and figure out how to kind of scale them. So the story on that is when I first proposed this undergrad classes, our faculty were very skeptical. And one of the big worries was that they would need to water down their courses from the MBA curriculum to teach the undergrads. And they've now realized it's exactly the opposite.
Yes, for those of us that took 6 years before deciding to go back to business school, I can only imagine that the undergrads were much sharper.
Well, and they, to be honest, they have less of a social life, and so they, so they work. You can push them. They work really hard, and our faculty, frankly, love it because they look up to our faculty. They don't question anything they say. So this has actually become sort of the opposite problem, where they actually go much faster in the undergrad, and they've had to change the MBA class to account for that. Anyway, that's sort of gone well, but I think scaling these accelerated programs, I think, is going to be a big issue for that. The last thing I would say is that we're going to hopefully this fall, a new downtown center that's focused on behavioral science. This will be the first of its kind in the world. It's right across from the Art Institute. So it's actually 224 South Michigan. And the goal is to have a center where people can come in off the street, learn about behavioral science, and actually participate in behavioral science experiments. So this is super exciting. Like I said, we're the only school in the world to have ever done anything like it. And it reflects in many ways the rise of behavioral science at Booth. So our alumni think of us as a finance school, because a lot of our alums were very successful there. I would say that behavioral science at Booth, that group, is as dominant in its field as the finance group has always been. So there is an award in the behavioral science field given by the Society for Experimental Social Psychology for the best person in the world doing work. The last 3 winners are all at Chicago Booth. No other school has even more than one person. No other university has more than one person. But we have Nick Epley, Eilert Fischbach, and we hired this past year Alex Todorov, who used to chair the psychology department at Princeton. So that's been a huge success. The sort of the behavioral science group at Booth has been a huge success. Going forward, I think the one area we would like to do more in is sort of the whole, even the social sciences are becoming very computational now, using sort of big data and novel techniques. So we're trying to think about how do we hire people who have done, say, a PhD in computer science, but whose work could be in Booth, but doesn't really fit into a particular discipline. How would we think about bringing them in to Booth? So that's something we're thinking about with sort of going forward. So I would say in addition to just getting out of the pandemic, figuring out the new normal and work from home and all that, I think getting these initiatives completed, I think, is sort of the big things we're trying to get done.
Yeah. Well, obviously that's not a small agenda. So we wish you luck as you embark on that, or as you're really more in process of it. Maybe kind of our final question just of this portion before we move on to audience Q&A. This audience represents some of our most engaged and philanthropic alumni. How do our alumni leaders and donors on this call fit into those goals that you just described? And how do you think about prioritizing the investments of time, financial capital from alumni in particular?
Yeah, I think all of them are equally important, right? I think that, so I'll give you an example, right? If you think about, say, the annual fund, right, which a lot of our alumni, particularly on this call, have given to. What's great about the annual fund is that is flexibility, right? That gives us the ability to adjust as needed to whatever is most important to us. It also gives us the ability to pilot things. And one mode that we've really gotten to is to pilot things to see how they work and adapt very, very fast. So I'll give you an example. So we hired Senthil Mullainathan from Harvard Economics, as some of you know, like a couple of years ago, right? And he's setting up a new center on applied artificial intelligence. All the funding for that is coming from the annual fund, right? We were able to tell Senthil, hey, this is phenomenal work. We want to do more of this, but how do we fund it? We don't have an endowment for it. We've never done that work before. So the annual fund money is what enables us to do that. This year we launched, and talking about future sort of big strategic initiatives, we launched this year a new healthcare initiative at Booth. Obviously, a huge portion of our GDP. It's an area a lot of our students will end up working in. And so we wanted to launch an initiative that ties together sort of faculty interest in it with student interest, connect to UChicago medicine. And again, we're launching it purely using this sort of annual fund type mechanisms. And the goal is, look, if this is successful, then presumably we can raise money for an endowment for that. But this is the way we find out if it's successful or not. All of our research centers, our initiative on global markets, the Polsky Center, they were all supported initially by the annual fund. And so without that, none of this stuff would happen. But more than that, right, during this past year, Lauren, we relied on our alumni heavily for hiring our students when the market seemed, dismal, right? If you go back to now things look like, oh my God, everything is booming. But go back a year ago,
Yeah.
it looked like the world was collapsing. And we were like, okay, how do our students get jobs? And again, we were able to do that by reaching out to alumni, and they were able to offer, mentoring, help finding positions, help hiring our own students. Um, we were able to sort of help our students get research positions if there was no sort of external position available. And one of our alumni actually funded many of that stuff. I always tell our faculty this: when students come to Booth to do their MBA, they don't want to grow up to be the faculty. They want to grow up to be the great alumni that they're seeing. And so for our students, it's very important that they see you. And that means that you participate in club events, right? You participate as a guest lecturer in a class. You come to 2020, you mentor our students. You volunteer through, reunions, you recruit our graduates. So having a higher connection to you along all those dimensions, that's really what makes this a great community. And always tell our students, right? You're here for 2 years, you're an alum for life. And so for them, finding out about the community and engaging with it is sort of the most critical thing. So without your dedication and all the things that you do, without your engagement, none of the things that we do is ever going to be possible. So I'm deeply grateful to all of you for your service and your generosity.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a question in from one of the participants just around how alumni can support students and sort of soon to be alumni. You talked a little bit about mentorship and engagement, but is there, are there sort of other ways or, opportunities for the alums to get more directly involved in kind of that direct student support?
Absolutely. And again, if you contact anybody in our alumni relations, they can, the goal of alumni relations is to find out for each of you, what is it, the way in which you would like to contribute, right? For some people, it might be, I like talking to, we have alums who have, done great stuff in, the credit markets. And they're like, I'll speak to the credit club about how do you get a job in that space, about distressed debt, whatever it is. For others, it might be, I'm an entrepreneur. I would like to mentor teams, right? I'd like to mentor people. I'd like to be an entrepreneur in residence. I'd like to teach you how do you raise funding. So it's really up to the individual alum as to how they want to give back to the school. And we will always find a way to engage them. I mean, we have an unlimited set of things that we need. And depending on what your interests are and what your passion is, we can always find a way for you to be engaged. For example, I was talking to Star just a couple of days ago about, some of our students would love more help knowing how to do tech interviews, right? Like, more and more our students, we have way more students going into tech than to finance now. And so we were thinking about, well, maybe what we could do is to have a set of alums who work in tech, who can talk to our students about, look, if you're trying to get a job at a, Google or a Facebook as a PM, this is what they're looking for. If you're trying to get a job in sales and ops at Amazon or Microsoft, this is what they're looking for. And those are things where the alumni know way more than we do. They're closer to the ground, and we would love to get their input on how they can help in these things. So to any alum out there, please contact Alumni Relations, and we will set you up with things that are, down the lane of what you would like to do to help contribute.
That's great. I always think that, navigating it as an alumni is always, a little bit more challenging to figure out kind of what that right point of intersection is, and whether you engage directly in the community with students, or you're doing it more as students are transitioning out of the school. So that's quite helpful. One other question that just came in from a participant that I think would be helpful to just maybe wrap this portion with is really about, what have you been most proud of students for in this past year?
I think the thing I've been most proud of with the students is that they, throughout, this is not the experience they signed up for, right? And I get that. Throughout it, they've been incredibly constructive. We've had lots of dialogues with them. I appreciate their frustration about particularly not being able to connect socially as much as they would like to. They adapted to this sort of online module learning very well. In fact, some of them adapted too well, I would say. So I was talking to one student the other day, and I was like, oh, where are you? And she's like, oh, we took the year off and decided to go to drive around the country, stay in different states every, month. So the sort of adaptability of our students, the ability to say, okay, here is something where I can take this opportunity and complain about it or make something of it. That's been phenomenal, right? They've been great. They've been very engaged in terms of learning. It's very easy with online learning to disengage, as you know, right? And any of you with kids knows that, frankly, high school education or middle school education does not work through the remote model. But for our students, it's worked really well, right? They've been engaged. They've been able to connect with the faculty. They've given great feedback to us on what's working and what's not. And so I have the deepest admiration for our students in not ever making this an us versus them, or, oh my God, my life is, terrible because I came in. It's been about, okay, here's where we are. How can I optimize now given that? And how can I sort of get ahead? And now, to be honest, the job market is booming, right? I mean, the economy looks great. So they've sort of come out of it and they realize that, wow, maybe the experience wasn't what I thought, but the final outcome doesn't look too bad. And, we just announced an hour ago that we're holding graduation at Soldier Field, which I think is going to make them happy too.
Well, that's great. And talk about feeling optimism about the future. Well, look, we'll transition out of the formal Q&A portion, although it's been great to see some interaction from the audience, even if it's by Zoom. So while attendees are thinking about questions, I'll just begin with one submitted during registration. We're all beneficiaries of the rapid development and the rollout of COVID-19 vaccines, and the solutions to address the pandemic really required collaboration between, business, scientific, policy, public sectors. And so, the first question is really about how Booth is capitalizing on the university ecosystem as it thinks about training future leaders in multidisciplinary collaboration.
Yeah, as I mentioned, that was sort of a key. I mean, even I think honestly, that's why Bob Zimmer and I got along really well when we first met, and he decided that this would be something that I might be good at, because one of the things I'd done in my prior job at Stanford is to sort of connect the business school with computer science and set up the first joint degree like that at Stanford. And so Bob's view always to me was, look, I would like Booth to be more connected to the university. Whatever you can do along that dimension is going to be a positive. And that's why I've tried very hard to make that a centerpiece of what we do. So we are very much in this mode that we are in a world where the more interdisciplinary you are, the more valuable you're going to be. The old days where you took a job and you were in it for 25 years are gone. With most of our MBAs, if they're in their first job 3 years out, I think they feel like, oh my God, what am I doing? So it's very much not about the first job you take anymore. It's about what did you learn in your MBA in terms of how to think and how to deal with ambiguity, how to deal with data. And then you take it to different positions over your lifetime. And so the more connected you are to other units at U Chicago, the better off you're going to be. So we're really pushing that, right, through the joint degrees. One thing that sort of I was surprised by is how little Booth students take classes outside Booth. So I asked the students about that, and their response was, well, there are way too, we have the flexible curriculum. Yes. And they're like, well, there are way too many things at Booth anyway that I want to do. I don't really want to go out. Their timings are different. Yeah. So one thing we're trying to do is to, it's the old saying, right? If Muhammad won't go to the mountain, bring the mountain to whatever, right? So I'm actually bringing university faculty to Booth. So we have faculty from the medical school now teaching at Booth. We have joint law business classes. And so part of it is just exposing our students to what's happening outside in medicine. So I completely agree with you. This is a key aspect of what we're doing. And the other aspect of our curriculum that's changing is that within the Booth curriculum itself, it's probably unrecognizable from the one you went through. The number of sort of technical classes available at Booth, you can now take classes in app development, in machine learning, in AI, right? And so we've been able to bring in the right faculty to teach them, whether they're our own tenure line faculty or people outside, recognizing that that's ultimately the world that you're going to be in. Whatever industry you're going to join is a tech industry. It doesn't matter what you call it, it's a tech industry. And so understanding these things is crucial. So we've been trying to do a lot more with the computer science department. As I mentioned to you, trying to hire these faculty who are at the interface of these areas and figuring out a way to get them to Booth. So I totally agree that is a key portion of what we want the school to become.
So your enthusiasm around that just sparked a thought from one of our participants around whether Booth ever has plans for a Silicon Valley campus.
I think having 3 campuses is plenty. I don't know that I want to have more. We are trying to do creative things though. So, last year we started doing this. We have a private equity lab that's very successful. So, many of our courses are moving to an experiential model now, right? Where you're taking a class while working at the same time in PE. We started a VC lab last year. And part of it was that we have students who are taking it, but who would then fly to California and then do, work there for a couple of days with a VC firm and sort of come back. So we're sort of using that model, I think, quite successfully. I don't think we ever want to do another physical campus. I think being asset light is a huge asset to us. I don't think I want to go to the model of having real estate in California and dealing with that.
Well, and maybe a follow on to that, just knowing the interest in innovation and entrepreneurship is sort of what other investments or sort of, whether it's new centers, whether it's partnerships or just additional faculty. Can you talk just a little bit more about the school's support and focus of the areas of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so the interesting thing I would say is that, in many ways, Booth was set up for this. Like I said, we're not a finance school. What we have always been is a data school. So as an outsider to Chicago, I always looked at Chicago as the place where people did the best empirical work, right? To me, that was Chicago. It's a place that believed in evidence and rigor and analysis to get to where it needed to. So what we have tried to do is to bring that notion of rigor across the school. So we have the best marketing faculty in the world now, right? Why? Because they understood the value of data and applying it long before anybody else did, right? So, we have a sister school, if you will, right, up north, which people used to view as a marketing school. Why do we have the best marketing faculty in the world now instead of them? It's because we sort of disrupted it by understanding that data was the key to marketing, and they sort of stayed in the old world of marketing. So I think it's just recognizing that and making the investments, Lauren, to make sure that we will always be the best school in data. And I'm agnostic as to where you apply it. You can apply it to finance, to marketing, to accounting, behavior. It doesn't matter. That to me is really what's great about our school. So we have a new concentration we put in a couple of years ago called business analytics, which is booming. And again, all these classes I mentioned to you, they're in that space. And so we haven't really had to retool the curriculum. Our faculty are already the best in the world at doing that. And it's just recognizing that and making them teach at the frontier. And honestly, our students can take it. It's not so clear that students at other institutions can or will take that level of rigor in the curriculum. Our students expect it and they step up to it. And I think that's what makes it such a great school.
And apparently they are graded on it too.
They are, well, hey, you get what you measure, as they say. If you didn't measure it, you wouldn't be doing it.
Well, good. One maybe final question, just around you'd mentioned earlier about kind of this counter-cyclical trend in business school applications. And amazingly, right, a year ago, it felt like the world was imploding. And now here we are, and you've got a really robust and booming economy. But one of the trends that's sort of gone across that time period is the trend in MBA applications. As a general matter for top schools, MBA applications have been down. A bright spot being Chicago applications to Chicago Booth are up. But I guess, what do you attribute that decline in, and how do you and some of the peer schools think about addressing that?
Yeah, so we didn't have that decline, right? I think for a couple of reasons. One is that I think we've been better at innovating, bringing in new programs, changing what we do. For example, putting in these accelerated type programs for U Chicago undergrads, putting in a 2+2 program so that any senior at any institution can apply for deferred admission to Booth. Last year, when many schools had issues, so Harvard, for example, their entry class is 25% smaller than their usual class. I think we handled the wait list much better last year. So we did some things, I think, which sort of helped us. I think longer term, there was an issue that you heard lots of articles about, well, the MBA is not necessary anymore. It sort of lost its value. And this isn't, it won't be public for a while. We set a new record again for applications this current year for next year. So we haven't seen the trend. And part of it is that we have been good at, I think, moving, pivoting, adapting to the market. Again, people think of us as a finance school. Now they realize, no, if I want to be great at marketing, this is the school I want to go to. If I want to get a great tech position, this is a school I want to go to. Our fastest growing alumni region is the Bay Area and Seattle, right? Last year, for the first time, we have more students now going west than east for jobs for the first time ever as of last year. And we've been able to recognize that by focusing on our strength in data and being able to change the curriculum rapidly, we're actually able to take students in. And so now our students want to be PMs at, Apple or whatever, and they realize, well, this is a school that can get them there. Or if you want to go to Goldman, this school can get you that as well. So we've really diversified, and that's helped us we have consulting, which is very, very strong always, finance, and now we have tech. So I think we've done a much better job of sort of diversifying and moving with the times faster, and that's helped us. I also think to the notion of applications being down this year, I think pretty much everybody is going to be up. I think the whole notion that the MBA is not useful, that's going away. You look at the big companies in the world, they're all run by MBAs now, right? Microsoft is run by our alum, Satya, who's an MBA from Chicago. Google is run by an alum, but not by our alum, but by an MBA, right, Sundar. Now Amazon is going to be run by an MBA, right? Because the guy who ran AWS is a Harvard MBA. So that notion has completely been shattered, right? Like you look at the data, it's clear that even in these big tech companies, there is huge value to having somebody maybe who has some sort of undergrad, which is sort of a bit more technical, but then does an MBA. And that's not viewed as sort of what you need for a good product manager role. Who are the people who end up being CEO? So I think that myth again has been dispelled. Particularly somebody who's done an undergrad, is working, and they realize, well, I'm not maybe so sure I want to keep doing that. Yeah, I want to check out what else is available to me. The MBA is the best place to do that and to pivot into whatever career that you're looking to. So I would say, yes, if you did CS undergrad, you want to be a software engineer all your life, you absolutely don't need an MBA. But anybody who wants to pivot into a management role or change what they're doing, the MBA continues to be by far the best way to do that. So I think long as we are nimble, adapt to what companies are looking for and what the students are looking for, the best schools will stay the best schools.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a great note to end on. Thank you again, Dean Rajan, for your time and conversation. Really, on behalf of the Dean, myself, and all of us at Chicago Booth, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We know there's a lot of demands on your time and attention right now, and we appreciate your interest. We are truly grateful to have you as the best investors and volunteers in the school and value your continued support. So have a great rest of the day, and thanks for joining.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much, Lauren.
Thank you, Dean Rajan.